Isaiah 55, 1 through 13, from the Common English Bible. All who are thirsty, come to the water. Whoever has no money, come, buy food and eat. Without money, at no cost, buy wine and milk. Why spend money for what isn't food, and your earnings for what doesn't satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good. Enjoy the richest of the feasts. Listen and come to me. Listen, and you will live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful loyalty to David. Look, I made him a witness to the peoples, a prince and commander of peoples. Look, you will call a nation you don't know. A nation you don't know will run to you, because the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, who has glorified you. Seek the Lord when he can still be found. Call him when he is yet near. Let the wicked abandon their ways, and the sinful their schemes. Let them return to the Lord so that he may have mercy on them. To our God, because he is generous with forgiveness. My plans aren't your plans, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my plans than your plans. Just as the rain and the snow come down from the sky and don't return there without watering the earth, making it conceive and yield plants, and providing seed to the sower and food to the eater, so is my word that comes from my mouth. It does not return to me empty. Instead, it does what I want and accomplishes what I intend. Yes, you will go out with celebration, and you will be brought back in peace. Even in the mountains and the hills will burst into song before you. All the trees of the field will clap their hands. In the place of the thorn, the cypress will grow. In place of the nettle, the myrtle will grow. This will attest to the Lord's stature, an enduring reminder that won't be removed.
This Christmas, our family, God and I guess border guards willing, hopes to travel one last time to the house I grew up in, the house that my parents will soon be selling so that they can move into a life lease. And trips home are full of memories, aren't they? Maybe like me, you're someone who still goes home or brings your family home to where you grew up for Christmas. Or maybe you're older, but you can still recall that feeling from when you were a young adult or a young parent. Driving home, passing more and more familiar landmarks as you get closer and closer with old memories playing in your mind. This December, I can already begin to picture my drive from the Winnipeg airport to my childhood home in Niverville, Manitoba. We'll pass by the turn on the highway that leads to our old church, where 30 years ago, I'd be nervously and excitingly practicing my lines for a Christmas program around that time of year. We'll pass by the town that I played many in away hockey game in, where I'll remember the smell of Zamboni exhaust and cigarette smoke in cold air as ice hits skates. And yes, those were different times when it comes to things like ventilation and smoking indoors. And then we'll ease into my hometown, where I kind of doubt they still hang the big star and bell tinsel decorations from the lampposts on Main Street, but either way, I'll remember them well. And then we'll finally arrive at home, where I'll remember snow forts in the front yard, street hockey games on the driveway, Christmas picnics in the living room, and the taste of our traditional Christmas meal, my mom's burritos, at our old dining room table. Trips home are often full of memories, aren't they? And biblical historians tell us that Isaiah 55 was written to the people of God as they returned home to Jerusalem from exile. Like my triple B, their home was surely rich with memories. But unlike me, they were coming from exile and they were returning to devastation. The prosperity they'd once experienced in their promised land, which peaked when David was their king, was now only a memory. Their home, the high point of which had been their temple, was in ruins. In fact, not only had they lost their prosperity, many would have wondered if they had even lost God or been lost to God. You see, historians also point out that many of the Israelites may well have believed that the temple, which had been far away and in ruins for decades, was somehow necessary for them to be in relationship with God. And more than that, throughout their history, God had repeatedly given them covenants that promised they were God's people and that they would be so blessed by God that they would flourish. In other words, well, this Christmas, I will be returning to a home that I can safely assume will feel as full of good times as I remember it. They were returning home with only their memories that would have caused them to ask, is God still with us? If God was with them, wouldn't they have still had this temple to go back to? If God was with them, wouldn't they be flourishing like the covenants promised? And so when Isaiah begins his message in chapter 55, he is speaking to a ragged remnant of a once prosperous people who have almost nothing but their memories. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you that have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money, without price. Isaiah opens this message with these words to a people who likely are thirsty and who likely don't have enough money to eat. As scholar Christopher B. Hayes points out, the book of Nehemiah, written not that long after this, reports that the Israelites were having to borrow money and grain to get by, with some even needing to sell their own children into debt slavery. It seems likely that as they straggled back into Jerusalem before that report, they were likely already similarly destitute. And so, when Isaiah invites these ragged travelers to think about prosperity, about more than enough water to drink, in fact, so much wine and milk, everyone can have it for free. When Isaiah invites these ragged travelers to think about that level of prosperity, which for them was part and parcel of their relationship with God, Isaiah is taking them down memory lane to much better times that are now nothing but distant memories. So forgive you if, now that you know the context of Isaiah's opening words, you're wondering if he's actually being a little bit cruel. Come, drink all you can drink, he tells a people that could once drink nearly all they could drink, but now can't. But Isaiah persists. In fact, he doubles down. Listen carefully to me and eat what is good and delight yourselves in rich food, he insists. Incline your ear. Come to me. Listen so that you may live. And then, to any poor, thirsty, hungry traveler with the stomach to keep listening, Isaiah gets to his point. In words that now become more and more clearly God's, not just Isaiah, Isaiah leaps past memories of food, water, and more than enough wine and milk to drink, and gets right to the beaten down traveler's true grief. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. See, I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for everyone. With these words, Isaiah is not just dredging up their memories of material prosperity. Isaiah is now dredging up their memories of a time when they felt so much more confident that God was with them. He's reminding them of their everlasting covenant, the one that said they were God's special people who God would make sure would flourish. He's reminding them of when King David became the answer to their prayers, leading them out of the mess they had been in the book of Judges and into a time of stability and even glory. He's dredging up the painful memories of the things that once made them sure that God was with them. Right now, at the time when those memories and assurances feel lost. And if that makes Isaiah's words sound even more cruel for a moment, reminding these people of what they have even lost when it comes to their sense of being in relationship with God, take note. His words might appear to get even more cruel. While Isaiah's dredging up memories for God's tired and discouraged people, Isaiah's not only saying, remember when things were better, Isaiah is saying, remember these things so that you might know that things are getting better. I will feed you, Isaiah reports God as saying. I will make an everlasting covenant for you, Isaiah reports God as saying. And given that God's remnant people would not have been feeling overly fed, given that God would have, for a very long time now, been seeming to give them only the opposite of what the covenant seemed to promise, these might be hurtful words. Unless, of course, they're true. But they're far too good to be true, aren't they? It's impossible for them to suddenly have so much when they're so obviously poor and returning only to ruins. Well, Isaiah's words now finally show some empathy for that natural reaction. Because Isaiah then reminds God's tired people that with God, the impossible is possible. What's too good to be true can just be plain true. Because God, he proclaims, is the one whose thoughts are not our thoughts, the one whose ways are not our ways. So high are God's ways and thoughts that they are as high as the heavens are higher than the earth. And at the same time, God's infinitely high thoughts and ways come right down here into the dirt and muck of our actual physical lives. They come down like rain and snow. And they do not return to the heavens until they have watered the earth down here, making it bring forth and sprout, yielding harvest that becomes the bread that God's poor and impoverished people are hungering for. So sure is Isaiah, or so fully committed at least to this God who is speaking through him, that this passage then ends with a total victory lap. With God not just promising to feed and renew the covenant a little bit, but depicting an out of this world celebration for it, saying, you know what, when I'm done, you'll go out of exile with joy. You'll be led back home in peace. And as you go, the mountains and the hills will burst into songs right in front of you. The trees will clap their hands. And where thorns and nettles were growing, a magnificent cypress will spring up instead. And all of this will be your reminder that even though you thought you were cut off from God, you have in fact not been cut off from God, that God's relationship with you is everlasting. It's an audacious message to give to a group of beaten down, burned out travelers who've been in exile for decades and are returning home to rubble. These are brave, potentially even hurtful memories to dredge up in this time of pain and destruction. But these are even more audacious memories to dredge up if one is also promising that these memories aren't just painful, they are actually examples of the goodness God is going to pour out on God's people. What a bold thing to say to people in such pain. But might there be something in there that we need to hear in our time too? You know, when I think of Isaiah's words here and the context in which he likely spoke them, I I can't help but think of the many ways in which so many of us carry painful memories of what we thought home used to be. While we're not coming out of exile or moving to a new location like the Israelites were, most of us sense that we are moving into an uncertain future that seems like it could be painful and destructive. In our global home, we know that if we don't radically alter our ways, we're moving into a time of climate catastrophe. In fact, the wildfires and famines we've been seeing would suggest that we're already entering into the borders of that new territory. The time when the earth seems so strong and resilient that we never even thought about it as something we could permanently damage, that time's just a painful, distant memory sometimes now, isn't it? Meanwhile, in our national home, in this country, we can see our democracy, our constitution, and our commitment to work peacefully across differences eroding, leading us into frightening and unknown territory there too. Territory that causes many of us to ask questions about safety, stability, and prosperity that we thought would never be asked in this country. The time when this was an exceptional nation, prosperous and unstoppable, that too feels a little like a distant memory sometimes now, doesn't it? Even in our church homes, we hear the sociological noise out there, predictions that say that the church is experiencing an unstoppable decline, that people are leaving organized religion and might stay there permanently. And so the time when we were sure that the church was flourishing, when it was just assumed that our kids and our grandkids would grow up to take over the church that we sweated over for them, that also sometimes feels like a distant memory too, doesn't it? And even in our individual and family homes, sometimes health crises, skyrocketing housing costs, low wages, and increasing rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness make even that American dream, the assumption that with hard work, we could have a good house, a nice yard, a picket fence, happy families. Even that sometimes starts to feel like a very old memory for some of us, for our youngest generation especially sometimes. Doesn't it? It feels sometimes like we are moving into new territory, towards a new way of understanding the earth as our home, this country is our home, the church is our home, our homes as our home. And for some of us, it feels sometimes, doesn't it, like that territory is scary. And like our times of prosperity might just be distant memories. Do you carry that pain sometimes? Does it ever keep you up at night? Or is it maybe something you just avoid thinking about? I wouldn't blame you for any of those responses. These can sometimes be anxious times. And yet, Isaiah's words still ring out to us as an even more distant memory from our spiritual home that extends even farther back, a memory that invites us to put even more confidence in it than we do any of our fears. Not as some quick fix to the consequences of some of our problematic behaviors, but instead as an answer to the question we so easily ask when what we thought were the signs of God's blessing feel like only memories. When the loss of prosperity may even cause us to ask hard questions about whether what we've built was as godly and faithful as we thought it was at the time. Today's passage offers us an answer to the question that some of us feel these days but may not even dare to ask. Is God still with us? Given all the loss, given all the destruction, given what we fear we might be moving into, given that we thought the blessings, that what we thought were blessings and signs from God sometimes feel like they weren't, given that we now fear that perhaps the destruction is the result even of our unfaithfulness, our exploitation of creation and one another for selfish gain, we ask, Is God still with us? My good news for you today is this. Speaking to people feeling much like this, for reasons similar to ours, Isaiah, speaking for no one less than God, God's self, says, yes. God is with you forever. To be clear, for God's people, Isaiah's comforting words didn't immediately come true. They struggled to get reestablished when they got back home. And then even after they did, they became an occupied people. The Romans moved in and subjugated them. But then, after all that, something happened that could only be imagined by the thoughts of one whose thoughts are not ours. Something began that could only be the ways of one whose ways are as high as the heavens. Someone came down from those heights to be planted in the dirt of this world and to germinate there and to grow and to yield a harvest that was so abundant that it never could have been imagined possible. And in just a few short weeks, we'll remind each other of that story. And so for now, as one way to prepare your heart for that audacious story to speak to you once again, I invite you to identify with me a few of your memories that you wish to bring into Advent and Christmas with you. What memories of better or more abundant times do you carry that sometimes or even always feel too far in the past, too left behind at the far end of memory lane to even bring to mind again? What memories do you associate with times when you felt more sure that God was with us? Consider which of those you think you can handle this winter, even if you only take one or two of the easier ones for now, and then bring those with you into the Christmas story as we begin telling it to each other in about a month from now. Not because the gift of Jesus, God with us in the dirt and muck of life, will make everything go back to what it was like before. That's not what Isaiah was promising, and that's not what happened for God's people when Jesus came either. But what Isaiah was promising and what Jesus did reveal was this message tucked right here at the end of today's passage, which is this. When we hold out to Jesus our precious memories of things we've lost, of memories of times where we felt so much sure that we were God's precious people, Jesus can help us to remember that just as we knew we were inseparable from God, in those moments we remain inseparable from God in every moment. Never cut off, never too far gone or lost in the rubble, but instead always still part of an everlasting covenant. Even when, perhaps especially when, our prosperity feels like it's becoming just a distant memory, we are needing to imagine a brave, bold, and very different future. Even then, God is with us.